Yeah, hello? Good. This is a slide that shows organized complexity, and I will link it to Biophilia. These are two examples from Islamic architecture. On the left, we have a doorway with panels that show organized complexity. Namely, there are many things happening on many different scales. As you can see, there are subdivisions, but it is all organized. And the tools of organization are symmetries. There are several types of symmetries. There is a translational symmetry. Translational means you move something in one direction and it remains the same. You don't move it continuously, you move it by steps. So you can take one of these things here and then move it down by the exact amount, and it's the same. And you move it down by the exact amount, it's the same. So that's translational symmetry. There's a different type of symmetry, which is reflectional symmetry. Namely, you draw a line in the middle of this pane, and you can mirror images. On the other hand, you can draw a line here, which is the actual door opening, and the two panes are mirror images, and there are sub-images at different scales. This is organized complexity within the frame of the door. Here is organized complexity on the surrounding frame because the door is open. So the two different topological concepts, because one is it's something in the center that's in the middle and defines itself, and the second one, the one on the right, is there's a void in the middle and the boundary defines itself. Now, this no longer has to do with symmetries, but has to do with Christopher Alexander's fundamental properties, which is how spaces tie together. So spaces tie together mathematically with some fractal scaling, which I will explain in more detail, with symmetries that I've just explained, very cursorily, and also with this void and boundaries. And of course, I'm talking to architects and architecture students, and you all have a gut feeling about what I'm talking about, even though I may be using different words. But every architect, every designer has this intuitive feeling that has been cultivated whenever we try to organize space. So what is biophilic design? The definition is that it's the love of living structure. And this is due to our evolution. We, don't forget, are animals, mammals, cousins of dolphins, because we have lungs, and we have a love of living structure, because we are biological entities. So this is hardwired into our body. It means that our entire body evolved around natural structures and around other biological structures. And the association is visceral. This association exists before the human mind developed its great intelligence, which allow us to kill ourselves and make things radioactive. So before this vast intelligence, we had this connection with other animals. It's still there, buried inside us. So we crave to be surrounded by living things, but also with artificial things that remind us of organisms. So how does this artificial thing remind us of organisms? It doesn't look like an organism. Okay, and here I was going to make a distinction between what the other lecturer who didn't show up, because this does not mimic any known biological structure. But when you look at, when you experience it, look at it. Suppose we go there. We feel the same connection that we feel when we are next to an animal, a friendly animal. Okay. So this is the visceral connection that we get with biophilic design. What are the short-term advantages? Well, it triggers the emotions that we have when we are in a natural environment, and more importantly, when we are in an environment that has biological entities in it. So we feel good emotionally. If there's no threat, even in a biological environment, you can have a threat. If you're next to a tiger, of course, you're going to be threatened. But if you're looking at the tiger from the safety in a zoo, you see that this is the most absolutely wonderful creature. The design of the tiger is absolutely incredible. I mean, it makes a Ferrari look like a piece of junk. The tiger is so elegant and it's not static. It moves. Every detail of the tiger is just absolutely wonderful. So taking away the possible threat, this type of environment gives us nourishment, emotional nourishment, and does not wear us out. Now, the reference on the bottom is a paper I have here that I will, since I have a lot of time, I will occasionally go back to it. So the biophilic index tries to measure quantitatively the effect that we get from this type of biophilic geometry, and I will detail the exact characteristics that we can use for design. We know now, let me take a little parenthesis. We know, not from architecture, but we know from traditional medicine going back tens of thousands of years, that nature has healing properties. And some natural cures take patients out to be exposed to greenery, and that's part of the cure. And that's very traditional medicine. It's separate from intervention, where you're opened up in order to tie your heart together. That's wonderful. It can save a life. But for 100,000 years, people knew, and the healers knew of the healing properties of natural environments. Now that's entirely due to biophilia. And in the last 5 years or so, there is an enormous number of medical experiments that show the documented instances of biophilic healing, and document some of these. I give you references in this paper. Now the opposite is where an environment that alarms us. If the experienced geometry alarms us, then we feel stressed, and if stress creates a fight or flight response, it is the response that we get from a tiger when there's no barrier between us and the tiger. Okay, if the tiger could eat us, it creates a stress, and we need to run away as quickly as possible, or climb up a tree. Do we get this sort of stressful response from the built environment, from the geometry of the built environment? And the answer is, of course. And again, there are experiments that show that aspects of the built environment create this stressful. For example, I look around here, and I'm very glad to find nothing that generates stress. Otherwise, my host would be very unhappy. But things generate stress that are poking out at us. If there are cantilever overhangs that don't show any means of support. Here we have these wonderful columns that support everything. So we're perfectly fine. Now the long-term effects of biophilic environment are even more important, because they boost the body's own defense mechanisms. So if you're not stressed and are reacting in a fight or flight syndrome, then your defense mechanisms are stored, and you are able to fight off invading pathogens. This has nothing to do with architecture. There are microbes in this room that can attack us, and some are potentially deadly. However, our wonderful immune response keeps those microbes from doing harm to us. If we're healthy, we're eating well, not overdosing on coffee, and eating our greens, a lot of greens, the immune system works. Now, if the immune system is stressed and starts to break down, then what is normally in the environment will attack you. And people in non-biophilic environments get sick more often, they get stressed, they take days off. So these are epidemiological studies that show that some built environments, and that's architecture, some built environments make people sick. And it's not only the sick building syndrome, where you have microbes caught in the air conditioning vents, but just the geometry of the environment is enough to lower your defenses. And so some buildings make you sicker, and others are more healing. So this is the conclusion of the first part of the talk. Nature is healing. And we have known that for hundreds of thousands of years, but we seem to have forgotten it recently. Like we have forgotten many important things about the humanity. So let me jump to a way to measure this quantitatively. I propose 10 elements that contribute to the biophilic effect. So the first is sunlight, and preferably from several directions. If you know Alexander's pattern language from 1977, this is one of the patterns. Sunlight on 2 sides of every room will make you feel very pleasant and calm, and has healing properties. This is a wonderful space because you have sunlight from not 2 but 3, and in some places 4 sides. So this space is very good for that. Second, color. And by color I mean real color and great variation. Now looking up here, the nice color that I see is the wood. The wood has a wonderful brown ranging from ochre to darker color. As far as applied color, I don't see much applied color here. So that could be improved. The last time I gave a talk, it was in the other small room, and there were 2 very colorful paintings, and those were enough to bring a note of color up to the environment. Third, the gravity. The human body is built to experience and evaluate gravity, evaluate the balance, equilibrium about the vertical axis. So again, I will use the studio as an example. I see everything vertical where it should be to support loads, and then everything else that it supports is horizontal because it needs to be horizontal, so that's perfectly fine. The only diagonal thing is the staircase, but that's because it is built that way for a functional reason, and it seems completely stable. You all know of examples of staircases that seem to float in the air. You know, that's a conjuring trick of the architect, but the person who looks at the staircase and who is ready to go up that staircase feels very anxious. That induces anxiety. Going further, some award-winning projects intentionally bend the diagonals where they don't need to, intentionally bend the vertical supports to make them diagonal. That creates a tremendous anxiety. They also bend the horizontal, like these beams. For what reason? No, these are beautiful. These are horizontal because they need to be horizontal. But other award-winning buildings, they make these diagonal for no reason other than a stunt. Well, okay. So for the last 40 years or so, we have been the profession has been awarding prizes to buildings that induce anxiety, and that is really a medical crime. And when the architectural profession eventually realizes what it's doing, or receives lawsuits from the medical profession, then things will. I will anticipate getting back on the screen with the next topic, which is fractals. What is a fractal? Who likes cauliflower? You don't have to like the cauliflower to eat it, but remember what the cauliflower looks like. The cauliflower has worlds and worlds. So take a magnifying glass and focus on one of the worlds, and it looks exactly like the entire cauliflower. And then you go to the world within the world. It's exactly the same. So a fractal is a structure that has substructure where you magnify everything and it looks exactly like the bigger thing. So that's a perfect, or it's kind of mathematical fractal, which cauliflower is not a mathematical fractal, but nature has produced a wonderful mathematical fractal. Most fractals are approximate, namely you take something and you magnify a piece of it, and then you see that it's similar to the larger piece, and then you keep going down in scale. And I want to show you that there are fractals here. Excellent, yeah. Okay, there are fractals here that you may not know were fractals. This wonderful roof is made of raw wood. And it's a shame it's not down here, because this thing is not fractal. This thing is black. It doesn't do any harm, but it doesn't give us any fractal satisfaction, where that wonderful wood is up there, but it's lost, unless you look up. Now, the wood texture, when you magnify it, you get more wonderful texture, and then you can magnify it down to the microscopic level of the cells in its wonderful texture. That's why we just love natural wood. Okay? We're willing to pay for natural wood, and we're willing to do these silly tricks, like create formica. Where is some formica? Well, actually, congratulations to this office. You know, this is a real wood, so it's not formica, but anyway, formica, you know, gives you like 25% of real wood, which is better than nothing. At least it shows that we appreciate the fractals. Next is curves. Biological things are curved. Natural things are curved. But the only straight line that our predecessors saw was the horizon in the desert, or the horizon at sea. Okay? We don't have straight lines. And okay, we're in a building that's full of straight lines, because things have to be that way. But on the small scale, what are the small scale? We could have some, you know, nice waves here. Where are the nice waves? Well, you know, I didn't design this building, but on the small scale, we could have some curves which are missing. However, if we go to an 18th century building, on this scale, there are curves, and we feed on those curves if they're nice, if they don't stick out at us. If they're nicely integrated as traditional ornament, tends to be, then we enjoy the curvature. And of course, some buildings have an overall curvature, the vault or the dome. You have the overall curvature, and then that can reflect in the small scale curvature. I'm throwing in elements, stylistic elements of architecture, but I'm not arguing about any styles. I'm throwing these in as part of biophilia, as part of our attraction to biological forms, because animals and plants are curved. The detail to attract the eye, well, again, we have the detail in the wood grain. There's a detail. Some more factors. Water. We don't understand why we like water, but human beings love water. So there are people writing in Biophilia trying to explain why we like water. There's a premium in Japan. You can go and find a very expensive hotel room and pay an enormous amount of money because the yen is a very strong currency. Or you can pay 5 times that to have a room with a view on a tiny little pool with a carp swimming in it. It's the premium value of water. The greatest Islamic architecture has a water feature. Why? Because in Islamic countries, the climate is very dry. A little bit of water just gives you, it satiates the thirst. You know, all this is in the mind, but you have a little fountain with a little trickle. The kings made sure there was a little fountain in the palace. Then, real life. We connect to real life. We like people. We like to talk to people. We have our domestic animals. We have our dogs, our cats, our birds, fish. We connected them. It's not just it is a visceral connection. And isolation from living organisms really makes us sick. You know, I hope you know, that in hospitals now they're bringing in special visiting dog to the rooms of people. They ask, are you allergic to dog? If you're not, they bring in a visiting dog, and it makes the patients happier. In Japan, some offices are starting to have an office cat, where a cat lives there and just walks across the offices, across the desks in front of the computer screens, and people enjoy that. These are healing properties. Now, the last two, 9, is representation of nature, which is naturalistic ornament, realistic paintings, reliefs, figurative sculptures. This is more so in the West than in the East, but the whole Western architecture tradition relies upon this type of representation. 10 is more abstract. It is organized complexity, which is what I started this talk with. We have intricate yet coherent designs, and all of Islamic architecture, which does not rely upon representation. All of Islamic architecture has organized complexity in a wonderful ornamental tradition, which is abstract and mathematical. So I count these as two different elements of the biophilic index. Okay, so we have a list of these index. We can sum them or estimate in some way, and this is the conjecture is that the biophilic index, to have a high biophilic index, is essential for a general long-term health. That's a pretty strong statement. And the new paper that will come out in 2 weeks tries to justify this using medical experiments and epidemiological experiments. So have architects been using what I've been talking about? Well, not in these words, because these are new words, and even the term biophilia is pretty new. But all of unself-conscious design for tens of thousands of years has been incorporating all these factors because it has been tried and found out that it does improve our health. Here is our university campus, and some of us consider it beautiful, 19th century, and it has these features. And since I drew this picture, I know there are also trees which provide the other biophilic elements. How can we improve the urban realm? Well, we need a fractal structure, like a cauliflower. How do we make a city into a cauliflower? We need to take a magnifying glass and magnify each part of the city and find more and more structure that's adapted to the human body. So we have a city, and we have a neighborhood, and then we have a cluster of buildings, and we have the block, and we have individual buildings, and then we have the facades and the entrances. But it doesn't stop there, because the mathematical fractal, you keep magnifying. So we have to magnify the facade and get structure. And this is where things go very bad. Because if you have a minimalist facade of just polished metal or brutalist concrete, there's nothing more there. You need subdivisions, like in more traditional architecture. And then you need subdivisions around the doorway. And you need subdivisions and of subdivisions. So from 2 meters, which is the height of a human being, where we're going down from the urban scale, we have descended to the architectural scale. And then we're going down, and hopefully we can find these subdivisions that have been designed into the structure, whether we're there either because of the materials that we use or because the architect made a special effort to create the scale of that dimension that we needed. Many, many dimensions, going smaller and smaller and smaller, down to 1 centimeter, down to what I said earlier, the grain in the material. So if we have a stone, nice polished stone, where we can touch it and walk alongside of the facade, I know stone is expensive, but some people in the past were willing to pay for polished stone. Why? Because of the grain. So some things are beginning to make sense. The biophilic effect just gets us to a point, but then we need to incorporate the other geometrical aspects that I mentioned, namely the partial surrounding that we had, the void surrounded by a boundary, or the focus in the center of an organized complexity that draws us, and that's the secret to creating urban spaces. Because urban spaces, we haven't had a decent urban space built for decades. People don't want to go to urban spaces, the new urban spaces, because they have forgotten the configurational principles for creating a successful urban space. So this is not at all about urban spaces, but one characteristic of beloved urban spaces is that you sit or stand in the urban space and you look around you and you see organized complexity. That means the building facades. Nothing to do with the space itself. The surrounding boundary has to be interesting. Has to be interesting visually, mathematically. Interesting not in the intellectual sense, but in the mathematical sense. Namely, it has to have a lot of information. So you stand in so-called Times Square, which is not an urban space. Well, there's information bombarding you all over the place. Well, you know, maybe it's nice, maybe it's overload, but at least it's not totally devoid of information. You go to a contemporary urban space somewhere in Spain, and you're surrounded by curtain wall glass. There's nothing there. You look all around, there's nothing. It affects the urban space where you're sitting. You don't want to stand there, you don't want to sit there, because it's informationally dead. So the rules for urban space go beyond biophilia, and these are the configuration rules that have to do with the geometry. The city, the living city, has to guarantee a necklace of public spaces that are connected by pedestrian access. So each public space has to be designed by the principles that my friends and I have published since Nikos Salingaros' patent language. Then the urban spaces have to be accessible pedestrian with a robust pedestrian path. Then those pedestrian paths have to guarantee a necklace of public spaces so that you can negotiate the city as a pedestrian and go from one urban space to another, not shutting down the circulation to cars, no, because cars are absolutely necessary. But in order to have the coexistence of the pedestrian network and the other transports, namely cars, delivery, trucks, traffic, but protecting the pedestrian. And if the city has the wealth in order to create public transport, you can have a metropolitan system, a light rail, whatever. That depends on the city. But it is essential to have mixed use. The mixed use is what can catalyze the mixing of the pedestrian urban fabric with the other transport. Now, here in the United States, we have done our best in order to destroy the pedestrian space. So in most cities, we cannot walk anywhere. I have been told that we have some visitors from Istanbul. Welcome, be careful. Istanbul, I've never been to Istanbul, I would love to come. One of the great cities of the world. But some new developments are destroying urban space by copying the worst that the Americans have done to destroy American cities. So if you're going to copy something that the Americans have done that is good. We Americans have done wonderful things. Don't copy the mistakes. So let us shape forms according to human feeling. This is another university. We have not, this is several centuries old. We have not built any university space like this for the last 60 years. Even though it's in ruins, it has this wonderful spacing and human qualities. So to continue, the fractals connect us through the scaling, because our own body is fractal inside. If you've seen a picture of the lung, it is a perfect fractal, because you have the air passage coming in and it subdivides. And then each one of those vessels, the air vessel subdivides, and then each one of them subdivides until you get down to the cellular level. And you may have heard that if you take the entire lung and open it up or stretch it out, it goes for meters and meters and meters, and the surface area is enormous. That's because of fractal. That's because of fractal qualities. Okay, so when I look at you, I don't see the lung. But we feel that we are fractal, and it's not only the lung, the blood system is a fractal because you have the arteries and the veins, and then you get the smaller and smaller veins down to the capillaries, again, subdivisions. So we connect to the smaller dimensions of the city. So if the city works on all scales, then we connect to the small scale, and we then immediately connect to the entire city if it has these smaller scales, and then we perceive the complex whole and we work coherently. And I'm just scratching the surface. Again, this is the open architecture, not the urbanism. But I'm scratching the surface because it's easy to explain the fractal in the spatial dimension, namely things that you can measure. You have some small things and smaller things and smaller things and smaller things. That's easy to see. But the city is a dynamic, like an organism. It's a dynamic complex system that things work, the cycles that work on different time scales. And the living city has all of these time scales, and they're running one inside the other. And the living city has all these time scales running. So a living city, say for the pedestrian, you walk out into the living city and things are going on all the time. Some things are taking a year, some things are taking a month, some things are taking a week, other things are taking a day, other things are taking an hour, a minute, a second. All these things are happening at the same time. And that's a fractal in time, which it's more abstract, you have to measure it. So just to show you a picture of what is a fractal, on the right you have a fractal because you have subdivisions, and on the left you have something that's not a fractal. So you may like the one on the left better, fine, but it's not a fractal. And if you want to build a building like that, then you make sure that there are other things that are fractal in order to create a fractal connection. So what evidence do we have that any of this makes sense? Well, when we look at the use of public spaces, we notice that the ones with biophilic qualities that I have described are very highly used. The incidence, which was measured even in the 1960s by Holly White, the use is very, very high, whereas those without biophilic qualities, nobody goes to. And architects erroneously think that it's because of the design. Well, no, it has nothing to do with the design, it has to do with the biophilic qualities. And when you introduce some greenery into a plaza, say, this is another tremendous misconception. The architect trained in the paradigm of the last several decades will say, let's put some green here. So they go to the computer screen and put some green. Okay, so we'll put, that corresponds to lawn in the plaza. We'll put some lawn in the plaza. Nobody pays any attention to lawn in the plaza. Green means complexity. So complexity, you have to have some trees, bushes, and maybe a little bit of lawn. You see many scales, the complexity. The trees, you don't have to organize the trees. You don't have to line them up. The trees have their own fantastically superior organization, which is non-linear. So in parks that are used, you have these pieces. You don't have everything covered with trees because then there's no room for the people. But you have this complexity of the green that gives you the biophilic effect, whereas ornamental green could be just this carpet, which is green. Doesn't give you much feedback. Okay, and so the design community has for decades been obsessed with just putting in a little bit of lawn, which doesn't do very much. So the experience of biophilia is visceral and it has to be close up. So it's something to be useful. You cannot just look at it, even though it helps to look at it. You should be able to come close to it and really feel the connection with the biophilia. Who's keeping track of time? Because I'm expanding my talk to the regional. Nobody's keeping track of time? Okay, so I'll just talk until people start to leave. Okay, here are some spaces that are shaped by human movement. This is not really biophilia, but it's paying attention to the human being, which is indirectly part of biophilia. You see this urban structures. You see the bollards here, the old-fashioned bollards. They enable you to have cars and pedestrians close to each other, but the pedestrian feels safety. Bollards were used for thousands of years until they were recently eliminated because they don't obey certain stylistic preconceptions. But the natural geometry that arises when we pay attention to human movement is not a severe geometry, it is a complex geometry, it is a looser geometry. And this creates negative feedback among some architects who like to see everything just straight and severe because I've been taught that that's the nice thing. Well, the bottom line of my talk is that we need a total reversal of how we regard the built environment. And what we have been taught to be this abstract severe beauty is not beauty at all. It is very intellectual that often goes against our biology and could have a harmful consequences on our health. You know, nothing can be stronger condemnation than this statement. But of course, it's very difficult to change what you have been taught, that everything should be perfectly lined up and everything should be abstract and minimalist. So, hopefully the message is going out, and I'm not the only one communicating this message. I have colleagues all over the world who are applying these building projects, giving lectures, publishing, teaching. Developers have a gold mine if they want to apply biophilia, because the human scale urbanism has been shown to vastly increase the value of the project. This has been proven over and over again over the last few years. It also brings back local artisans and industries in a way, a move away from globalization. And here we, on the other hand, we are promoting something that's absolutely revolutionary to bring back, to focus again on the local artisans, keep the big brother from taking over construction in the city, re-encourage local traditions. That is fought tooth and nail by the vast multinationals who want to bring some famous architect and plonk a skyscraper in the middle of a historic city because they make a lot of money, but it destroys the city. And it kills local architects, local industry, the small person who works there. So this is a huge fight, which I'm throwing my support behind the local industry. It makes economic sense. I'm throwing my support because of human health. And let the people in power take care of that. Here in the United States, we have to rewrite the laws, the codes, because the type of urban fabric that is healing is now illegal, because the urban codes were rewritten after World War II in order to prevent the small scale of mixing uses and mixing pedestrians with cars, etc. So in order to build a new traditional development today, you have to get a code variance for everything. You have to, because all those codes just create more inhuman urban fabric. So, to conclude the talk, we need to convince stakeholders of the health benefits. Who are the stakeholders? The users, the industry, the building industry, the regulating industry, the government, all the companies involved in building. And we have to be careful also of a hoax. Because a system that exists, this global system that wields trillions and trillions of dollars, that comes in and brings a famous architect who plunks in a glass skyscraper in the middle of a historic city and destroys it. This system wants to maintain its hegemony, its power. It's making trillions of dollars by destroying things. So, of course, they have woken up, they listen to all my lectures and my friends' lectures, and they say, biophilia. Well, we can do biophilia too. Look, here's a biophilia skyscraper. We have some lawn on the 20th floor, okay? You can see the lawn on the 20th floor. You know, it's a swindle. But yet some architecture critics buy that. So I hope everyone in this room who's listening to me is far more intelligent and will learn to ignore those obvious attempts to stick a biophilic label on something that's totally anti-biophilic. Okay, I have explained what is biophilic. You know what it is, you can judge. Everyone should judge by themselves. Please don't listen to architecture critics. They are the worst kind of liars. Judge for yourself, just from the heart. So we need a world where we feel humanity, where we can connect to, like I can connect to this tiny piece of wood here. We need a world that corresponds to the way the body has evolved. And I've tried to just throw in a few random thoughts about how the body has evolved. And so I hope that there are people here who will get excited enough to delve into all the literature that has been published, and all of this is rather recent. Okay, so the literature published by designers and urbanists who point out the importance of the biophilia. And then if you're really interested, you can follow up and read the medical literature. If you're an architect, there's no need for you to read it, but at least check it. Because what I'm proposing here contains revolutionary elements, and you are able to check it by going and reading a paper that you hardly understand because it talks about medical experiments, but it's there and you can read it. Whereas the opposition, who hires a star architect and builds a glass skyscraper and destroys a historic city, they give you the reasons. Look up those reasons. They're garbage. It's just propaganda for them to make a lot of money. So follow the roots. And when you see the roots are justified, then believe it. When you see the roots are not justified, it's just propaganda, then don't believe that. Don't believe that. It's just a scam. So I was just in Boston, and the last stage of this is occurring. Neuroscience experiments are proving what I have been talking about. So neuroscience experiments that measure the brain function show us exactly that all of these tools are the natural response of the human body. So I will finish with this. We design for minimum energy consumption, and such an environment looks old-fashioned because human beings for 10,000 years naturally designed for minimum energy consumption, and it's only in our fuel-glutted age now that we can afford to just burn oil as if it's going to continue to come out forever. So let me finish on that. Thank you very much. It should be, but no one who is writing on biophilia has yet delved into sound and smell. I have one paper that stresses that all the senses are involved in architecture environments. So your comment is an excellent one, and unfortunately my colleagues have been so busy writing other stuff that we have not picked that up yet.
So I remember a class where the problem was to design a house for a blind man. And the focus was on not sound or smell, but on touch. And he found his way around and through by touching different things that had different textures. So all the things we talked about today also, beyond the sound and smell, I think, you know, is a lot of it's based upon visual perception. But I also think it has great opportunity for the tactile, for walking up, you know, and touching some of these things.
Yes, you're correct. The human perceptive system is biased in a major way towards the vision. It's like 80%, 85%, unlike other animals who are more distributed, equally distributed. But having said that, we have blind people who navigate entirely by touch and smell and sound. Now, those people are totally lost in a minimalist environment because it's unchanging. Feeling along the wall, it's unchanging. If there is texture and ornamentation, things to grab onto, like we have in traditional environments, of course, that provides an anchor for a blind person to navigate their environment. And all that is eliminated by minimalist design. Other questions? While other questions have been prepared, I want to point out to the students, visiting students in Istanbul, that my good friend Harun Ekinoglu is a professor in one of the universities in Istanbul. Please, when you go back, you look him up. You tell him you heard me and you want to talk with him and maybe work with him on these matters.
Are you seeing this renewed interest in urban living in the U.S.? People coming back from the suburbs to the city boards as a positive trend?
Yes, it's a positive trend because it saves the earth. It has nothing to do with biophilia. In fact, suburbanization in the 1920s was driven by an image of biophilia. Okay? People in cramped apartments downtown were offered a house set in nature. That's totally biophilia. It's what I've been talking about. However, when entire cities moved out to the suburbs, you have 2 trees and lawn, okay, and everything is covered with cars, and it's not biophilic anymore. So the dream turned into a nightmare of commuting. And other reasons are driving people back into cities because now we have started to construct or save some biophilic buildings because of the structure, save some or plant some new street trees and mini parks that make city living biophilic like it used to be and still is in most parts of the world.
I have a question. You spoke a lot about biophilia in terms of form, what something looks like. I'm really intrigued by how nature acts. So that might be how selection happens, DNA, evolution. Perhaps it would be the way diverse environments outperform homogeneous environments. Can you talk a little bit about how we as designers might think about making decisions around how nature makes decisions?
Yes, well, that's another one I'll talk, which I will summarize in 1 minute. Nature has selected some of the solutions that I alluded to in my talk today, plus design patterns in Christopher Alexander's sense. Those were selected because they were the most healing to use, and over tens of thousands of years, people select those and reuse them and drop something that turns out to be unhealthy. However, we live in an artificial world for more than a century now, and there is a super selection because certain ideas become viral. They become viruses, and then they stop the natural selection process. So it is imposed, and then an architect says, wouldn't it be wonderful if I have just a polished metal wall here for the entire side of the building with no windows? Isn't that wonderful? Well, that does not come from evolution. That was something that was made possible only by technology in the middle 20th century. Okay, so architects have this vast stock of traditional evolved solutions, which is how nature managed to evolve organisms, and then architects in the past used sort of the same evolutionary principles, but architects now with enormous technological power can impose something that has not evolved.
Or use it to do the same thing.
Yeah, you use it, but we are not careful enough because we are so powerful that if we choose something that's not evolved, it can have terrible consequences, and we see that. We see the terrible consequences. Chernobyl, okay, it's a terrible consequence. It's unusable. We made a mistake. It was something that was not evolved. Nuclear power is wonderful. I support it, but we made a mistake there. So there are other typologies in the architectural arena that are not evolved, and I'm not saying that we should just go back to traditional solutions because the computer is not evolved. The computer, well, evolved from counting machines to vacuum tubes, etc. There is evolution of the computer, but the computer was not present 10,000 years ago. But we need to be careful for an architectural solution to see its consequences. And we have been terribly negligent in applying something because it looks wonderful and fancy and new and not worried about its consequences. I hope that gives you some flavor of what we're thinking about.
There's a lot there that we can.
Oh, yes, yes.
Maybe one more question, anyone?
With the advent of AI, this is a very, I have to think a story through capital. Do you think at some point that AI will actually be able to sort of choose perfect biophilia in markets?
We are at the stage now where we can.
Yeah, interesting.
But that work is being done and it's not published. So there's a group of AI people, deep learning, by Demis Hassabis in London, who have developed a program that is trainable in order to learn a set of rules. And this program was trained and won the World Go Championship. This was not reported in the US press because people don't know what Go is. In the Far East, this was revolutionary. It's as revolutionary as the invention of the atomic bomb because the Go champion, the Korean gentleman, was beaten by this deep learning AI program. Now, the same program has been used by Dr. Salingaros in London in order to judge natural environments for their scenic beauty and healing properties just by looking at them. The same program. And has chosen those environments. Now, when I read her paper in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, I immediately asked her, please run all the Pritzker Prize winning papers. And she said, oh, that's interesting. She's not an architect. That's interesting, let me do it. And then, unfortunately, she must have talked to somebody who told her, listen, you know, this is dynamite. the result could get you in a lot of trouble. So we're not doing it right now. But just to let you know, things are there, they're happening, they're boiling. You know, the soup is boiling. More questions?
I have a question. Do you think Americans struggle to be in touch with nature and biophilia design is a way to bring back to our way of living a little more in touch with nature? Is it a way to like bring back nature to the society, you know, since we struggle so much being out there enjoying life?
Design with biophilia is a way to bring nature and the benefits of nature in inanimate structures immediately to us. We could start today to build everything, new commercial buildings, residential buildings, using biophilic design. It's going to make a beautiful world. America has nothing to do with it, anywhere in the world. In fact, China needs the most. They're doing the most unbiophilic blocks of apartments anywhere. So, anywhere in the world, we can make a decision. We mean the powers, you know, not us in this room. Governments, building companies can make a decision to create a more biophilic environment. It will be better for everybody. Just a decision to be made.